Today, something truly special. We're going to see the first ever Porsche 928 built, and the second and the fourth, all in one place. The very first cars together on video for the very first time. I'm going to take you on a tour of these cars, not just as they are today, but how they came to exist in the first place and their history. You see, these cars are not regular production cars. These are 3 of the 12 cars that Porsche put together for the lavish Porsche 928 launch event in the south of France in 1977. This is also the story of one man's pursuit of the first cars and his philosophy towards them. You'll meet Andrew, the owner of these cars, and he's a sharer. He wants people to be aware of these cars and to know their story. As I think about what content to give you in my videos, I choose things that I think would be interesting myself. If you're a subscriber, you know that I'm slowly restoring my own 928. But in this case, I decided it would be interesting and, let's say, challenging to see if I could find the first ever Porsche 928. And that is what I set out to do. As you guys know, and obviously, I'm British, and thought that I could easily get to Germany on one of my visits home to meet the owner and his car if I could find them. So I set about some research, and as it turns out, it was a lot easier than I thought, because the first ever Porsche 928, would you believe, is in Connecticut, where I live, with numbers 2 and 4. So let's start the tour of cars that represent Porsche's first clean sheet design, and which were revolutionary, especially for 1977. And here they are. This is number 1. The first ever Porsche 928. This is the second ever. This is the fourth. And here is the owner come historian come archaeologist, Andrew. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Jay.
How are you doing?
Nice to meet you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh,
My
you're welcome.
God, when I pulled up here, and my 928 is parked behind the camera, when I pulled up here, it was like, oh my God. It sort of takes your breath away when you first see them, right? I'm blown away by them. So these cars, if I'm right in saying, and I've given the guys a sort of a backdrop to the video and to these cars, and we're going to get into that in a minute, guys, about going into each one, guided tour, all of that in great detail. We're going to get quite nerdy on you. But if you do want to watch us just driving them, you can click forward to that. But am I right in saying, Andrew, that Porsche got to a point where they said, we're done with all the prototyping, we got to launch this car now, and I guess we should build some. So they built 12 of them, right, for a very special event.
Yes. So when the prototypes were finished, late 1976, the marketing department at Porsche arranged a press launch in France for late March of 1977. And then they wanted, well, we need 12 cars, we want them these colors, and you've got 20 minutes to build them.
Yeah, they were built in a rush though, right? Hand-built in a rush.
Yeah, they were definitely built in a rush over a period of just a couple of weeks. The number 1 car is very well documented, and it got its registration plate on January 10th of 1977.
Wow.
So they were pretty much, they at least did the paperwork then. Yeah. And then the next time the cars all appeared together was in late February, I think around the 20th or the 22nd. They appeared in France for
this mega luxurious hotel called the Mar d'Artigny in Saint-Paul-de-Vence in the south of France.
Yes.
Each room had a swimming pool. It was a really lavish thing that all these journalists were invited to, right?
Yeah, and Porsche had done other press launches there. The 924, I believe, was done there. So they had used this formula, in the past. I think maybe the 914, but beautiful hotel in a beautiful area. Yeah. And then lots of time, many days, a couple of weeks.
They were there for a long time, weren't they?
Yeah. Up until March 8th, I think.
That's quite interesting all by itself, because most car launches, I've never been to a car launch, but you think they'll maybe last a day or two, right? People get photography, or the individual journalist time with a car would be relatively small, but if they were there for a couple of weeks, that's a good long time.
Well, I think it's, we're just used to things moving so quickly now.
Yeah.
And in 1977,
Yeah.
everyone had to fly in. It's all paper magazines. It's all photography and developing film.
Yeah.
And writing real articles about cars that are pages and pages long.
Yeah.
So at the press launch, Porsche brought management. They brought some of their professional drivers. And then I think that they just made enough time to like really get into the moment
Yeah.
for the
Yeah,
journalists to be there.
Did
and,
a proper job,
you know,
really,
yeah.
effectively. Yeah.
They had a like a bare running gear in the hotel room.
Oh, really?
Yeah, with all of the
Yeah.
everything polished
Everything
and painted
exposed
and
and, yeah.
exposed and
Yeah.
it must have been fun. So the professional drivers are taking the journalists out, scaring the hell out of them, I'm sure, and then the magazine editors and writers, they got to use the cars.
Yeah.
And it was worldwide journalism then.
Yeah.
They came from the U.S. and Europe,
Yeah.
Japan. The number 2 car ended up in a Japanese magazine.
Is that right? I think I've got a cover of that, a picture of that. Yeah. Yeah.
So
This is me leaning on the first ever 928. Andrew, tell me
handle it.
about your search for these cars, because it must have taken quite some effort. It didn't take me a lot of effort to find you, but to find these cars for the first time, was it your mission? Did you set out on a mission to find number one, or did it just sort of land in your plate, or were you sufficiently networked in, or somebody just offered it to you? How did you come about all these 3 cars?
Well, it's a bit of a circuitous route. I've been into 928s since the late 80s.
Tell the nice people how many 928s you've got.
Now, there's 6 now. But I don't know the total. There's been a lot over the years. And of various types, up to S4. I've never had any GTs or GTSs. I just, but at some point, I think it was like in early 2000s, I decided that I had this, some book or something that had them in with the Porsche seats. And I'm like, boy, I'd really like to find one of those cars. And at that time, no one liked Porsche. It was unsellable.
Amazing.
There were so many cars that it was removed so the car could be sold or just to, satisfy someone's needs to not have it there or whatever. But I'm like, I'd really like to find one of these cars. So I found a red over black Euro 78 that had black and beige Porsche and a black interior. And that car is actually still in our family. My brother owns that car now.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, it's been around since about 99 or 2000 or something like that. And, because I had, like I said, a few S4s, and I was like, I really like the purity of the older design. And at that time, the older cars were not very popular. Everyone wanted the newer bodywork and the newer look and the S4 and the more power and et cetera. So the cars were cheap, and I found one, and we got to play with it for a while. And so then after that, I kind of concentrated on early cars, and I figured out that 78s had many unique parts on them. And
they were still getting to making them. They hadn't quite sort of mass-produced them yet. They were still tweaking at that stage.
Yeah, they were still working out problems and doing design improvements. But it's many, hundreds and hundreds of unique little detail parts on all 78s.
We're going to see on these 77, these very earliest cars, that some of the things you'll see on them, you won't see on any other cars.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that later.
Then I just started looking for 78s, and I owned a couple 78s, 79s, various lime green, interesting colors. I forget how many I owned over the years. And then Jim Doerr from 928 Classics, he had found car number 6.
That's the red one, right?
Red over brown.
Yeah.
And he started working on that, and he is specializing in these early cars, and he supplies parts and does services and things of that in Michigan. And he and I had a lot of conversations because I was liking early cars and he was liking early cars. And the number 6 car was kind of interesting. He had enough documentation to prove it was the 6th car. And it is one of my favorites in the group. because it's red.
Yeah.
I like red. And also because that car was in many magazines.
Yes, I've got some pictures of it.
Yeah.
I'll put them up on the screen.
It was really prolific in the magazines,
Yeah.
way more than any of the others, maybe even combined.
Oh, really?
Les puristes vont frémir. La nouvelle Porsche 928, en effet, est un moteur à vent. Une page est tournée, la technique moteur arrière refroidi par air est sacrifiée sur l'autel des réglementations américaines. Le confort et la facilité de conduite prennent davantage d'importance, mais le caractère sportif reste affirmé grâce au raffinement d'une conception qui, pour être conventionnelle, n'en est pas moins exceptionnelle. En Provence, premier sondage d'opinion.
Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez de cette voiture?
Elle est bien, mais ça marche pas. C'est trop puissant pour les routes que nous avons ici.
Et vous, monsieur le curé?
Oh, moi je trouve ça magnifique, mais enfin,
Oui.
c'est pas dans mes cordes.
Il n'y a que le disque,
Il y a des disques sur les 4 roues.
Ah, disque de capot.
Je la trouve formidable. Malheureusement, le prix est un peu élevé pour certaines bourses.
Mais oui, madame, c'est à vous que ce clin d'œil s'adresse. Ces phares sont savants. Ils s'escamotent, la hauteur de leurs faisceaux se règle en marche, et leur lavage est assuré par des jets d'une redoutable puissance. Typiquement Porsche, le style de la 928 sacrifie le tape à l'œil au fonctionnel. L'équipement et la finition sont irréprochables. Place avant très spacieuse, mais siège arrière de petit format. Réglable en hauteur, le volant entraîne avec lui la console porte-instrument, assurant dans toutes les positions une lecture parfaite des cadrans. Dossier de siège arrière rabattu, la capacité du coffre atteint 400 décimètres cubes, mais le seuil de chargement est élevé. Montés sur amortisseur, les pare-chocs sont noyés dans des éléments en plastique résistant à des chocs à plus de 20 km/h. Mais le clou, c'est le nouveau moteur. Un V8 tout alu refroidi par liquide de 4,5 litres. Ces 240 chevaux suffisent à assurer d'excellentes performances à la 928, malgré un rendement très modeste d'à peine plus de 50 chevaux au litre, qui garantit un fonctionnement souple, facile et à l'essence ordinaire. Il est donc à l'avant, mais pour équilibrer les masses, la boîte à 5 vitesses est à l'arrière, faisant bloc avec le pont. La suspension arrière innove avec un original dispositif anti-survirage par articulation des bras.
So at that time, you know, he's like, well, you know, what do you think about this low VIN number? And he goes, well, you know, why don't you look for some low VIN number cars? I'm like, I don't know, Jim. I'm like, it's not that important to me. And
Yeah.
you know, you got number 6. I mean, I'm there. You know,
I can
you're
come
always
look at yours. Yeah.
You're always going to have one lower than I have. You know, that's what I.
Little did he know.
That was our conversation. You know, this was years ago. So then, I think it was in 2011, he found this car, number 1, on Craigslist.
On Craigslist?
Yes, and it was in very rough shape.
Yeah. And I'll put some pictures up of the
Yeah.
day that you got it, and you can see some of
this is
that.
when he got it.
When he got
was-
it, yeah.
When
Yeah.
it was, when he got it, it was in very rough shape.
Yeah.
And then he held on to it for quite some time. And then he was again, you know, what do you think about these low VIN numbers? I'm like, well, I know I'm never going to get one lower than you have now. So it was sort of like, it just wasn't that important to me.
Yeah.
And then in 2016, Jim had some life changes he had to do. He had some motivations. And he called me and said, you want to buy this number 1 car? You know, he never advertised
How
it.
long did it take you to answer that question?
It was pretty fast, but I mean,
I bet.
it took us a while to develop a deal, and you know, and there was
Yeah.
a couple
So
of
he
moving.
owned it at that time, did
He
he?
owned it,
He'd bought
yeah.
it off the guy from Craigslist.
Yeah.
And the guy from Craigslist presumably thought, because the chassis numbers they're not 001. This doesn't have an 001 chassis number, or VIN number, does it?
It does not. It is 1-1.
It is 11. So that would lead people to conclude that it's the 11th car. And I think even Porsche got that wrong, didn't they, initially?
Yeah, there's been a lot of confusion about that
Yeah.
for a while, even within the company.
It's resolved now, but
It is
at the time,
It's resolved now.
yeah,
But again, you know, this was, and I have to give credit to Jim. he was able to kind of get it resolved.
Yeah.
Back then, you could write to Porsche and ask about your VIN number. It was very informal. You know, you sent a letter in the mail to Germany.
Somebody had a quick look.
And then somebody looked and they sent you a letter back on the Porsche letterhead.
Yeah.
So the gentleman that owned this car in the 80s, since the 80s, he sent it in. He got a letter back that's in my file and says, oh, you have the 11th car built.
Yeah.
And when Jim got his car, VIN 16, that had a letter in the file. Another previous owner did something similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
That letter said, you have the 6th car built.
Right.
It went to the press launch. It had license plate SCX 2137.
Yeah.
That was the registration, you know.
And these 12, I should mention, now you've mentioned the license plates, these 12 initial cars all had consecutive number plates, license plates, didn't they?
Yes.
Starting with, what's this one, 22?
32.
32, going up to whatever it is, I can't do the math. So they were 12 and they were consecutive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, the consecutive with the production numbers.
Yeah.
So, car number 1, SCX 2132, car number 2, 33, etc.
Yeah.
So, once Jim had the information about the number 6 car, VIN 16 actually being number 6, you know, then he was looking for more older cars, and then found this one that was sitting on Craigslist as basically a parts car.
Unbelievable. And that's the sort of state it was in when it was found. It was sort of almost on its way to the breaker's yard.
It was on the way to the junkyard.
Yeah.
Because again, in that time, a beautiful early 928 was maybe $10,000 or $12,000.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and to fix these things up, I mean, I'm finding that even with my one, you know, they were, you know, subject to a lot of deferred maintenance, shall we say, and just left to rot.
So this car was very close to going to the junkyard.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, in the 928 community, there was a few folks that went to look at this car on Craigslist and turned it away, you know, because it was
number 11, they thought.
And it was pretty trashed.
And it was trashed, okay.
It was just unknown about all this stuff. And, you know, it was 928 Classics that sort of put all, that
did
not
the archaeology.
Sort of, definitely put together this VIN numbers, license plates thing.
Yeah. So now we've wandered over to number 2. And Andrew, how did this one come into your line of sight? I mean, I would imagine that once you've got number 1, and I see you've got a good Instagram handle for it, and I'm going to put that on the screen so you guys can have a look and follow Andrew, that your network is growing by that stage. And and the remarkable thing about this car is where you found it.
Yeah, so after getting number 1 and doing some of the work on it, which we'll get into later, you know, what's the next thing you do?
You go looking for number 2, right?
What's after 1, you know? And actually, it was more of a blanket search for
77
cars under, you know, number 30,
or
something like that.
Yeah.
Just to see what's around. You know, there was Auto Check, which is like a VIN check service.
Sure.
Well, years ago, you could get these early 10-digit VINs to come up on Auto Check.
Yeah.
They have since gotten rid of it.
Yeah.
It's only 17 digits.
Yeah.
So there was an Auto Check report on this car that was from the 80s, and it just said Shelton, Connecticut.
Shelton, Connecticut, which is what, 10 miles from here?
Oh no, it's
well, 40 maybe.
Yeah, it's down past New Haven.
But it's not in Germany. That's the point. You know,
it's maybe 50 miles away.
Remarkably close. I mean, that's the amazing thing about this story. Is I'm standing not 2 hours from my own house, looking at 1, 2, and 4.
Yeah.
So okay. So that's how you found.
Well, there was a little more to it. There's, you know, it was 1980 was the date on the title issued. 1983, 1984 title issued, something like that. And then, you know, there's no information around. So through my network and through a lot of digging and searching and asking around and looking around and looking at aerial photographs and.
Which is, again, proper detective work.
Yeah, just
going on here.
It's insanity.
Yeah.
I got.
And you went. Am I right in saying that eventually you went cold calling on the guy that owned it, right?
So I got a lead to a 928 in a yard, and it was on Google Street View. I went to the address, and it was on a dead end street, so not a lot of traffic.
Yeah.
And in the front of the house, there's a car, this car, and wrapped up in canvas like a cocoon. So it was on blocks.
The distinctive shape, though, betrayed it. Yeah.
But the wrapping was amazing because the car was lifted, and then the wrapping went around the car.
Oh, even underneath?
Even underneath.
Oh,
round
wow.
and around and around, ropes, and it was like tied up for a hurricane or something.
Yeah.
And then I saw the shape. I'm like, yeah, that's a 928, even under the lumps, because there was a lot of layers. So I went to the guy's house and knocked on the door, and he wasn't home, so I left him a note, just like in the 80s, what you would do.
Yeah.
And about 3 or 4 days later, he called me.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, that's a 928, come on down.
Yeah.
And then I went down and he sold it to me. So.
And the reason it was under a tarp, it had just been parked up for some reason, right? It stopped working or something?
It's a great story relayed to me by that owner. He was an older gentleman. I would say he was, I'm guessing, around 70.
Yeah.
This was a few years ago.
Yeah.
And he had the car since the 80s, and that was the auto check title issued in Shelton.
Yeah.
That was him.
Yeah.
And he kept the car registered, even though it was off the road for many years. And it was off the road because, according to him, he got so many speeding tickets and lost his license from, driving them like they're meant to be driven.
Excellent.
So he parked it. He was in trouble with his wife, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And he wrapped it up.
Just left it.
Outside and left it.
Wow.
A little more history about this is he told me in the paperwork he had the owner that he bought the car from. There's another gentleman who I talked to that back in the 80s, this owner would go to the train station and take the train to work every day in New York City.
Just like I do in mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
but I don't drive number 2.
And he always saw this white 928
yeah.
every morning. And he said, I know that guy's on my train because he's getting here at the same time. Finally, they get together on the train and start talking, and he buys the car from that guy.
Wow.
So I got a hold of that guy. He was even...
Oh, you did?
Yeah. He's a retired guy in Florida now, and he goes, oh, yeah. And he goes, yeah, that was a great car. He bought this car in England.
Ah. And he brought it back from England?
And he brought it back from England. Oh. And he worked for Kodak in the early 80s, and they sent him to England to be over there for a while.
Oh, I see, on secondment.
He was working over there.
Yeah.
And then this car was for sale in London.
Yeah.
And it was cheap because it was left-hand drive.
Yes.
So he bought it from some guy that was like, I wanted a 928, I got this one, I can't stand driving it here.
Yeah.
And the Kodak gentleman was like, well, I'm going back to the United States, so he brought it back, and he's the guy that
sold it
would
to
take
the guy
it,
that you bought it
yeah,
from.
take it to the train station. And so I talked to the Kodak guy. He sent me photographs from when he owned it in Connecticut.
I think I've got those pictures actually. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I'll put them up on the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back
in the day.
Back in the day.
Yeah. So car number 4 then, I know that because there's a sticker here that says number 4. Does it get a bit confusing from time to time with 3 white Porsches?
Sometimes it does, yeah.
So you've got number 1, you've got number 2. Your thirst for low VIN numbers was obviously still there.
It's still there.
And it's still there now, right? Well, we'll get to that in a moment, because I'm sure you're still on the hunt. It's like addictive at this point. But how did number 4 come onto your radar?
This one came on the radar through the same process as number 2.
Okay.
You know, older
networking and that
yeah,
kind of thing.
you know, older you know, title records from VIN checks and things like that, and those kinds of services. And this one was from Denver, Colorado.
Ah, okay.
Is where that was popping up again. Early 1980s title issue, nothing else, a one-liner, you know. So then, you know, the networking and the digging and the researching and
you ended up at the guy's front door again.
and not quite. So because it was a little harder, it's a little harder to get there than in Shelton.
Yeah.
So this has been one of the more enjoyable acquisitions because of the man I bought it from, and you know, he and I are still very friendly. And out of these 3 cars, it is the best car. This is a 38,000 original kilometer car.
Oh wow! This is in great shape then. Okay.
Yeah. It really is, and it drives like it, and you know, it's a great car. But I found out the name of the owner, and then I, you know, Googled and, you know, went that route, and it turns out he is a director of a technology lab at a university.
Okay.
You know, a scientist basically. And you know, of course, he's got an email, and I just sent him an email.
Went from there. Yeah.
And after about a year of emailing, you know, I
You were
said,
trying to persuade him at that stage. weren't you?
well, I was like, I'd really like to see the car, you know, and he said, well, I've had it since 1980,
Amazing.
1981, something like that.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's here in my garage, and, you know, so we finally got friendly enough to where he said, you know, come on out. So I flew to Colorado, and he lived in this very, you know, remote, beautiful neighborhood well outside of the city. It's not a place you'd ever just drive by or find it. And you know, he just turned out to be this like wonderful and intelligent, like hard-working man who could, you know, he could have retired years ago, and he's like so dedicated to his work and all that.
Enjoying his life.
And he had a great story about this car. He had gone to graduate school, and he was all done, and you know, and him and his wife, they had a new BMW 528e from the early 80s, and that was their one car that they shared. And he was driving it, you know, back and forth to the university through downtown Denver, and he's going along past this used car lot, and he's like,
How was this?
yeah, he turns around, this car is in there. He leaves the new BMW, he drives this car home.
Wow.
They only had one car.
Wow.
And, you know, his wife was like, oh, I love it, and all
Just
that.
as well, right?
Yeah. And, of course, they got other cars over the years, but he had kept it ever since, and very, very low use. And just, you know.
Amazing
really,
that people have kept these cars for as long as they have. I mean, the number 2 and number 4, since the 80s, the previous owners had them, and that's quite remarkable.
Well, they have, and number 1 as well, that car, the one from North Carolina, the owner from North Carolina, he had owned the car since the early 80s as well.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's talk about number 1 a bit more, and let's move over there and just talk about the ownership history of that. And then maybe what we'll also talk about is where the rest of the 12 are, of those original cars. So Andrew, we're on number 1 again here. This is the folder that you've got, which shows, I think, all the ownership from Porsche all the way through to today, and all the documents that go with that to prove it, right? That's what we're looking at here, right?
Yeah, we're very fortunate to have this car so well documented. Every ownership transfer, and importation documents,
Amazing.
And dates, and
Yeah.
it's very nice. Most cars, you don't get it.
And it spent quite a bit of time in German ownership, didn't it, before it came here?
It did. So Porsche until 92878.
92878.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
which is kind of interesting. That's when they sold it.
Yeah.
And then you know, 5 different owners in Germany up until from 78 to 83, and then exported to the United States, where
In 83.
in 1983, where the owner from New Jersey owned it from 1983 until 2011, when 928 Classics found it.
Wow.
So that was a long-term ownership.
Yeah. And here is just a few of the documents and the documentation that you've got with this car, Andrew, right?
Yes, and these are really the most critical ones, and how I got them is pretty interesting too. So the owner's manual for this car, which has the handwritten VIN number in it and the date of 10/02/77 when they did their when they
registration,
decided, maybe the registration, but it only had 31 kilometers on it, and then stamped, the owner being stamped as the Porsche factory and some of the first services by the Porsche factory. That was really nice to get. And then this document is like a German version of a title that passed along through the owners while it was in Germany. And as you can see, the original owner, Porsche, there's the original registration number on the license plate, and then the ownership changes through through various ownership changes along the way. Now, these were not with the car when I got it. It was unknown what was going on in Germany. 928 Classics traced the ownership back to the last owner that was in Germany that did the export to the first owner in the United States.
Yeah.
But all of this stuff.
So again, more detective work and
Right.
more networking got you.
It was no detective work, maybe some networking, and a whole lot of luck, because the last owner in Germany who had sold the car in 1983, a few years ago, he put these items on eBay in Germany.
No.
He held on to them for almost 40 years.
Wow.
And I was traveling at the time, and my phone was blowing up, and my network was going, "Hey, are you getting this stuff? Or what do you know, here it is." So
that's how you got them.
I was fortunate enough, I got with him.
In the right place at the right time.
Yeah. And then they got delivered to me, and I was like, this is unbelievable that the journey this car's been on, and those were gone for all those decades.
And now they're back.
And now they're back with the car, and it really cleared up.
Perfect.
You know, and really buttoned up all the ownership, which was, it's kind of a fun fact about this car's very strange journey.
So then Porsche built 12 of these launch cars for the event in the south of France. 3, obviously, and these are the original colours in white, but it wasn't just white. So you've talked about the number 6 being red. Were there any other colours?
Yeah, they made a nice little palette to send to the press launch. So the first 4, white over green. The next 3, so 5, 6, and 7, are red with brown interiors, brown Pasha, and then 3 silvers with black. And then the last 2 are petrol blue with this really super unique interior that's dark brown and light tan, like a 2-tone interior. The upper parts, they were first experimenting very early on with that.
So a mixture of colours then for the first 12. And I think I'm right in saying that of those 12, we know where 8 of them are. Is that right?
That sounds right. So we got these 3, number 6.
1, 2, 4. 6 is with your friend Jim.
Yeah, that's a red one. It's red over brown.
Yeah.
And the 3 silver cars are known, and they are in Europe. And then the one of the petrol blue cars is in the United States. That's with Wassinger Upholstery in Oklahoma, and he's a very experienced 928 restorer, rebuilder,
Wow.
upholstery guy, and that car is starting its restoration. That's going to be exciting to see that one come together.
Yeah. Fantastic, fantastic. Well, I think what we'll do next, Andrew, is let's show these guys around these lovely cars and talk about them and just show some of the quirks and features of them and the current state that they're in and whether things are original, what things are quirky about these early ones and so on. Let's get these guys in and have a look. Come on, let's get you in. So, Andrew, we're looking at number 4 car, and the differences with the press cars compared to the ones they started making after that, there are a number, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the hand-built nature of the cars, they didn't have all of the details for production fully developed when it was press car time.
These were rushed out.
They were
right?
rushed
And
out.
handmade in places.
Yeah, and there was a lot of handmade parts and improvising. And prototype-like items that ended up on these cars that just they didn't make it into production, or they were phased out relatively quickly, like within the first 20 or 30 cars, some of the items.
And we're looking at number 4 because number 4 of the 3 is I mean, they're all fairly well preserved, but this is the best preserved one and is the best example of some of the foibles of the press cars.
Yeah, out of the 3 I have, this is the lowest miles, best original condition car.
Yeah.
It has been repainted at some point over the years, white again, but other than that, it has a lot of great originality and the matching numbers and all the little original details are still with the car, which unfortunately all of them don't have everything. But this makes a good example for us to check out. In the engine compartment here, if you're familiar with these cars, you might notice a couple of odd things. There's a lot of jokes online and comments about jump posts, and this is what they were doing in the press cars. The biggest thing that jumps out at me, at least, with these is the airbox. It's very, very heavy fiberglass, thick, heavy airbox with these big ridges, and you can kind of see the handmade,
This is not extruded plastic.
Flaws and and everything. And the first one of these that I saw was on number 1, and I'm like, well, that's strange. And then, I started seeing them again and again, so I know they're correct.
Yeah.
Another interesting item on this car is the coolant expansion tank is all soldered brass that's painted black. So this is a brass tank. And just some of the ways they routed wiring and made bracketry, it's a little bit unique from the other cars. Some of the positioning of this equipment is very,
all a bit unique,
very early on, solid metal. They used these for quite a while, but there it is. The master cylinder reservoir is unique. It's much larger and has a unique shape, and that canted, cap arrangement. And there's some details like that under here. One last thing that you can't see on the video, but it's in all of these cars, is for some reason the right-hand passenger side camshaft in all 3 of these cars is different than the production cars in that it is built more like a 911 camshaft with a stub and a nut that holds the timing gear on. And anyone who works on 928s knows that there's bolts and no stub. And for some reason, all these right-hand camshafts on these very early cars, they made them differently in that weird way.
Okay.
It's one of those little things. On these early cars also, the grill slats are very heavy cast aluminum. I actually weighed them. They're probably, they're many ounces heavier than the production ones. They're very thick. They're rough castings. The bracketry is all very heavy metal instead of the plastic in the lighter units that came shortly thereafter. This car, unfortunately, has some federalizing lights that they're slated to be removed and those holes filled soon.
Quite right.
They also did not use bumper beating on the press cars.
Yeah, I noticed that, and at the rear as well.
And at the rear as well. And the fitment of the bumpers, especially the rear bumpers, is pretty sloppy. And if you look on the factory photos from that era, I mean, you can see the horrible door gaps and, you know, all part of the rushed,
cobbled together kind of mentality.
Yeah.
Albeit that some of the stuff they've used, like the airbox, is quite high quality materials.
Much of it is quite superior to what came later.
Yeah.
And you know, we'll see some of that in a few minutes, but the
Well,
bumpers definitely got improved. It's well documented in some books that they spent a lot of time developing the bumpers. You know, urethane bumpers they weren't common back then.
Yeah.
So they fooled around with the material a lot and the shape they could hold, and if they would hold paint. There was a lot of iterations, and these are very early ones, and they fit terribly, and they've always fit terribly, but they're heavy. You take these bumpers off, they're much heavier.
They're solid.
You know, very much thicker than the ones that ended up coming into production only months later and stuff.
So I've noticed at the back that it has, all three cars in fact, have blanks for the rear wiper. And there are some substantial differences at the back here as we head on into the interior, right, Andrew?
Yeah, so the wipers the rear wipers were designed in the prototype stage, but they weren't really completed. Right. These three cars went to the press launch in various forms, and I forget which is which now, but one had a wiper, one had plugs, and one had nothing.
Okay.
And off the top of my head, I forget
Can't remember which one is which.
But the photos are there that show that they went that way. And it was interesting to see that they actually had holes with plugs in one of the cars.
Yeah.
You know, at that press launch.
Yeah.
I took all of these cars had wipers by the time I got them. I don't know if the factory put them on or whatever. Or you know, people added on to these cars, you know, quite a bit over the years, mirrors and spoilers and things like that. Also related to these wipers, everyone knows this panel to be the tool tray in a 928. But in a press car, it was not. And this was made this way at the factory with these pieces on them. And these pieces are kind of odd shaped, as you can see. And
it's just fiberglass resin kind of stuff.
And this is kind of indicative of some of the material that you see in the interior panels of these cars is this yellow or gray or brown or some variation of that color spectrum of this very, 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 very tough material.
And probably quite heavy as well.
It's a little heavy. This one's not so much. These little panels here, you can see that they were like hand trimmed, and they have all of these little features that really have nothing to do with what's going on with this car, you know? And I think that they repurposed these off of something else to make a top for this piece at the last minute to kind of finish it up.
Yeah.
Because they use
That's funny.
They use these very strange little turn clips into these kinds of holes. This is obviously an afterthought, you know.
Yeah.
But it's in the press cars. Yeah. And in the cars without wipers, this was a mirror image of this, but they knew they were going to have these things because the bulge is here for the wiper motor. They knew it was coming, but they weren't quite ready, so...
Couldn't quite make it happen for the press launch.
On all these early cars, you see a lot of variations of this arrangement. Yeah. Cut, complete, whatever.
Bodge. Put it together somehow, get it done.
Yeah.
And as we sort of head into the interior, the other thing that sort of stands out for me is there's not a lot of leather in this car.
There's hardly any. The steering wheel and the shift boot is the only leather in the car.
Yeah.
And that was pretty common for a lot of up
The early
through
ones,
78.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so as we get into the back, into the trunk area, kind of typical 928 carpet. But this is a press car spare cover, and again, you know, you can see the anchoring device of these straps and these little slots, and you've got a spare cover in your car, right?
I
Jay?
do. It's nothing like that.
Why don't you, when you get why don't you hold on to that for a minute?
Oh man. Yeah, I can't really easily hold on to that with one arm.
But you can really catch the, you know, the thickness. There's the material again, and I mean, it is.
It's good quality. Now my one is really thin, and it's if I touch it, it
it's
could break.
they're a
That's not
potato
going to
chip.
break.
You're just going to hurt your hand if you keep.
Yeah.
I'm going to hurt my hand if I keep punching that.
Yeah.
So in the back, and one of the things that was kind of fascinating is that at the factory they used those. Remember those old label makers from the 70s?
Sure.
It was like a little gun
Yes.
and a wheel and a tape, and
Yeah.
they were using those at the factory on these cars because in places out of sight, I keep seeing these numbers like on a seatbelt fastener, buckle, or something.
Yeah.
I first saw it in number 1. It continues on in the rest of these cars.
Wow.
And so, as an example,
Oh look, there it is. Yeah.
004, this jack was in this car.
Yeah. It's there as well. Yeah.
And fortunately, all of these cars, their jacks and their lug wrenches are intact with the tape on them.
Wow.
I don't know how.
Wow.
This is the only car I got that has somewhat of a press launch toolkit because, again, the tool tray wasn't around. They weren't getting into all this yet, but they had these tool rolls, and it's barely populated. This is what was in the car.
This is
when I
what's
got
left.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think some of it's improper. I think that's later. I don't think these belong in there. But in the pictures, in the historic photos, you see these tool rolls in the trunk. And of course, you know, they have the solid spare wheels,
Yeah. I've got one of those in my car.
1976 date code
I
on
haven't
it.
got that.
Yeah. Yeah, so
This is lovely. So you just told me something really funny. Just say what you said to me off camera there, Andrew. Hand-painted wiring harnesses.
yeah, one of the weird features on these cars are hand-painted wiring harnesses where they had a plan to make the wiring. Their wiring diagrams were designed, and for these cars, because they probably didn't have the supplies, the harnesses are hand-painted. So any stripes that would be on a black wire with a red stripe, say, is a black wire with like red paint marks on the ends, so they can, you know, hook
That's
it all
crazy.
up. And
That's
all
crazy.
the cars have it.
And as we head into the interior, let's talk about some of the individuality. And I see, for example, the door lock just here. That's a star shape. That's unusual, isn't it? I know we're getting really nerdy here, but I quite like that.
They appeared on very early cars. I've seen them as late as European delivery cars in mid-77, but then they went to the more traditional round ones, but they are kind of neat. People like them.
And as we head into the car, the one thing that I am particularly impressed about actually is that the quality of the interior has really stood the test of time. I mean, this is original interior. I mean, the Pasha is all the original material, right?
It is. All 3 cars have 100% original interiors.
Yeah.
You know, they have some wear and all that, but anyone who's a 928 enthusiast knows that the interiors basically were falling apart in these cars very early on.
Yeah.
But with these, they were hand building them. All of the panels are made out of that same material that the spare tire cover is made out of, so they don't warp, they don't lose their shape.
Yeah.
And
So the door panel, for example, that I'm pointing at here above that piece of Pasha, that's that hard resin stuff
Yeah,
that we were looking at in the trunk.
it's very,
Very, very
you know,
good quality stuff.
It's the same stuff. There's
But
no,
done for expediency, really.
well, you know, that
Because they had to get something ready, and that was the quickest way they
Right.
could do it, I'm guessing.
yeah, so the interiors got much improvisation because in the prototype stage, you know, they didn't really use interiors while they were testing the cars and doing the drive lines and testing the HVAC and the suspensions and the body work and the mechanics and all this stuff. A lot of the prototypes, they had 911 seats, they had super rudimentary like flat door panels, and and then at go time, it's like, well, we have to make this look kind of like we're thinking it's going to look because they're going in all these magazines. So all of this stuff was handmade, again, kind of on a rushed schedule. But
So this, on my car, this panel here opens up. This one is bolted down because they weren't quite ready to go on that.
they weren't quite ready to go on that. It's screwed in place, and you can see by the design that they intended it to open. They had it in their mind, but really didn't have the little hinges worked out yet, or the
on that
little
particular day, ready for that
parallelogram
day,
hinges.
Yeah.
And they did make the cars purposely in this kind of unusual system with the black
Yeah.
here and the green there, and the entire upper area of the upholstery.
Underneath here, yeah.
Yeah, it's all black.
It goes black, goes from green to black.
And it
on the
makes it
top.
makes it kind of a unique look.
Yeah. And the pedals don't have 928 written on them, but they're correct, right? And
Yep.
there is a
That
kick
was the-
panel on the right-hand side here, which is not present
Yeah.
on the earlier cars.
Yeah, they're all kind of unique items, and then I'm really fortunate. It's all intact in all three cars, so
Yeah.
it's, you know, it enables me to confirm that's what was there.
Yes.
These are kind of cut pieces of some kind of trim upholstery plastic before the later door sills were made with the 928 numbers in them. Again, I just learned recently that these were in place on car number 51.
Oh, really? As late as that?
Yeah, because it came up for sale in Germany recently, and there was photos of it. Also, another white over green car, but it had those, which, so it was a while before they got them all,
Yeah.
standardized, so to speak.
But all of the dash and that, as I look inside the car, on top of the dash, that's all that resin stuff. This stuff here, and that's why there's no split. If I get in the car, all of this stuff is hard. Like you can hear my fingernails on it. You know, it's not soft.
It is much more, rigid than what
Yeah.
came in production. And here we are. These are some of the oldest 928s in the world, maybe the oldest.
Yeah.
And the stuff's intact.
Yeah.
And you can see where the paint's coming off. It's like this yellow, yellow
You can
resin.
just see it there a little bit. Yeah.
I think on one of the other cars it's very
gone through,
scraped
yeah.
off, and you can
Yeah.
really see it. But these panels, very hard, very, very rigid.
Yeah.
And the armrest sections are made out of that same material, very heavy when you have them off, and hard. And then a lot of the stuff is a lot like production, like this.
Sure.
It's very similar to what came out.
HVAC. Well, there's no air conditioning in these cars. is
Yeah,
there?
this is a non-air conditioning car. All three of these are. Never had it.
The original stereo.
It works too.
Oh.
And if you notice if you're a real 928 nerd, if you notice just the shapes of these, they're different than production. They really finished off this much nicer
Yes.
for the production cars. There's a big gap there that's the same in all the cars. But yeah, they're pretty unique things.
So now, you guys, the part that I guess you've all been waiting for is where we take these cars out, drive them, show you what they look like on the road. And we're out at the moment in number 4. And it's really nice. I love the green interior. And I guess, Andrew, what people might not have felt if they've come to a 928 new, you know, not that these are new cars, they've come into the subject new, is what a difference these cars made back when they came out in the 70s, right?
Yeah, I think it's generally underestimated how futuristic and game-changing the cars were when they debuted.
Very much.
You know, pretty long engineering process that started in the early 70s, and lots of pretty new inventions, urethane bumpers, and you know, the long timing belt, and you know, just a lot of special design work. You know, the seats, all these early cars have these op art Porsche interiors, and it was very daring, you know, at the time. And
God, I'm glad they did, though.
Yeah.
I'm really glad they did.
Especially when you think about what was driving around in the late 1970s on American roads. Yeah, so in the States, you know, we had, it was probably the bottom of the trough of American car design. You know, the safety bumpers had come out. You know, fuel economy was prevailing in performance and design work, and the cars were just, most of them were pretty boring and pretty ugly.
Same in the UK. I remember when the 928 came out, I was telling you over lunch that I actually had a picture of one on my door as a kid when I was 6 years old, because it just looked like a spaceship. I mean, it was for a young kid, as I was back then, an amazing thing to see. And I wonder also, for people who actually bought these as customers, these were fast cars. I mean, my first car in the late 80s still only had 45 horsepower. These would have been quite a high end, the top end of cars, right?
Well, I think so. You know, there was, I guess, some Italian cars in that era where, you know, the 512 BB was around, and
but you never saw those.
Much lower production numbers. But these had such a unique look. You know, at that time, with especially the Italian cars, you know, the Bertone inspired, you know, sharp angles and wedge shapes, which are beautiful in their own way, as well. But this was just very different. You know, very natural curves and shapes, and they were super futuristic looking.
I think they still are, actually. You know, they've aged well, and the amount of thumbs up I get in a 928 as I'm driving mine around is just brilliant. And I still love the sense of occasion and ceremony about driving one of these.
Yeah, they're a real pleasure to drive. They have they have a significant amount of weight. I think they're mostly a touring car rather than a sports car. But they're fun nonetheless, and you can sit in them all day.
Yes, you can. They're very comfortable.
They're definitely their own presence and their own design, and there's not a lot of comparables. When the cars came out, they were being compared to the XJS.
Yes.
BMW 6 Series.
That's right.
And those are, you know, they're fine cars in their own way, but this was just in its own league with the, you know, the clean sheet of paper design that they had been working on for so long. Put so much effort into perfecting a lot of little details with these cars.
And how does this one feel to drive? Number 4. This is the lowest mileage one that you've got, isn't it, of the 3 press cars?
It is.
It seems from a passenger that it's pretty good, this one, actually.
Yeah, it feels great. It's a a very low mile, 38,000 kilometer car.
And feels like it.
Yeah, and the suspension is all original, and the gearbox and the clutch and the driveline and all those things are, you know, I've never been apart, and they feel like low miles, and the car drives like it's supposed to.
Yeah. Number one, I am sitting in the driver's seat of the first ever Porsche 928. Are you sure you want to do this?
I am.
All right, yeah. So let's go. Dog's leg first. I learned that in my last video. Wow. Okay.
And as you may be able to hear, it is pouring now since our last little bit of filming 45 minutes ago. But we're going anyway.
We're going anyway. That's what cars are for, right?
That's what cars are for, including this one. It doesn't spend a lot of time in the rain, but you know, it does get used occasionally.
Yeah, it's a survivor, this car. Shall I go right?
Yeah.
Okay. It is raining cats and dogs, you guys. Well, here we go. 928 number one. We are off and running. I've just gone into third.
You did.
There we are. Takes a little bit of getting used to.
You're on a roll with these.
I know, with these manual gearboxes. Yeah. Wow. Well, first impressions are that you would not know that you're driving a car that was built in 1977. I know this car has been through the mill, it's had some neglected owners in the past, but actually it is not a bad car to drive. And it's still got some oomph in it as well, hasn't it?
It does. It does. It's got good power. It still does what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
But, you know, everything has a moderate amount of wear.
Yeah.
The miles are unknown on this car.
Yeah.
So.
But it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's still a pleasure to drive, and it's still an adventure. That's the thing about these 928s, I think. There's a sense of ceremony and occasion about them that you don't get with another car. So,
sometimes when I'm driving this car, I think about the people who have driven it, and
yeah,
it's you know, it's quite a cast of characters. Some well-known, there's some well-known journalists from the era: David E. Davis, L.J.K. Setright.
he drove this car.
They drove this car at the press launch. It's detailed in the Car and Driver from June of '77.
Yeah,
and Anatoly Lapine, who was, you know, one of the main designers of the project at Porsche, and you know, there was factory drivers at the press launch. I mean, I know that Jürgen Barth was around. I know he drove number 4. I've got pictures of him in that one. But you know, and then just through the years, all the characters. Maybe that first guy that bought it from Porsche.
yeah,
You know, it was an expensive car then.
very.
Not sure if he knew he was getting the first one, but
Yeah. And I love your philosophy. I mean, we don't know each other that well, Andrew, and here I am driving 928 number 1. I mean, I'm very grateful to you, but also I think it shows you know, the viewers, that you want people to see this car, you know, and I think that's important, you know, that it does get seen. It's an important car.
it is. And I really think that it has a certain, you know, guardian angel, if you will, following it around through its life, since it basically was on the way to the junkyard at one time, and
Yeah.
you know, it started life as such an interesting special car, and
Yeah.
you know, got used a lot, abused
Yeah.
a lot,
It's taken it well though. I mean, it's
and you know, now it's a bit of a celebrity car.
Yeah.
A lot of people know about it. A lot of people been in it, driven it, ridden in it.
Yeah.
And I like to think it's grateful for our efforts so far.
Yeah, yeah. I think it is. I think it must be. And especially if you do, you know, elect to take it further and to restore the car, and you know that. I mean, this would be, of all 928s, the one to do it on, wouldn't it?
It is.
You know?
And it is asking for more than it's gotten.
Yes.
You know, it has its way.
Yes, I'm sure, yes. Well, Andrew, I'm very grateful indeed for you sparing some time for me and my audience to show off your lovely Porsche 928s. I mean, 1, 2 and 4. What a privilege to see them, to drive them, to be out in them, and to see them in convoy, all three together. Absolutely amazing. So thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll come back again if you have anything done to these cars. And I know, Andrew, you've got a couple of other cars. Maybe it'd be fun to do a video with those. But look, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video as much as I have making it. It's been a really interesting journey of these earliest of early Porsche 928s. If you have, give me a like. If you want to go one stage further and you want to see journeys like this, why not subscribe? My own 928 is not as rare as this car. This is a 101. But nevertheless, there is a journey to be had there. So subscribe if you like that. Otherwise, thanks very much for watching. From me, from Andrew, from Porsche 928 number 4, number 2 and number 1. See you in the next one. Bye. In addition to Andrew, can I take this opportunity to thank these heroes? Without Kyle, Matt and Cam, this video would not have been possible. So thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate it.